like me, you've seen these headlines of new independent power producers emerging to feed into the national grid. And perhaps you're wondering, when will we finally wean ourselves off a century-old Eskom monopoly and realize cheaper power prices? Well, then stick around for my conversation with specialist journalist Carol Paton next. Because the long and short of it is this: we're at the start of an unprecedented electricity revolution right here in Mzansi.
I know you've heard it before, and I've also heard it before, but I think the factors are aligning better so that we can have an inflation-linked electricity price, and that will make a huge difference, not just to households, but to industry, to the economy, and that would be a great thing. So hopefully NERSA and Eskom together can achieve that.
Later in our trending topic, a Cape Town institution, the trendy Oranjezicht market, is moving, but just across the road, so don't stress too much about your expensive coffees. And finally, the apartheid regime once supported a failed operation to overthrow the Seychelles government, with On This Day in South African History heard at the end of the show.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcast channels.
Did you know that Tuesday is considered one of the most productive days during the week for many, and it's the day that most job applications are submitted? My name's Graeme, this is The Lead, and this is the South African Story. This episode of The Lead is brought to you by 10x Investments. 10x your future. Moving to our top story today, Eskom's held sway over South Africa's electricity production landscape for more than a century now, and with independent power producers increasingly entering the country's now liberalised market, no, not fully liberalised just yet, the way electricity will be sold to us in future will gradually transform, and the National Energy Regulator, so often in the headlines for either increasing electricity prices so much that it enrages civil activists, or on the other hand, too little that Eskom drags it to court, has its work cut out for it, keeping the local power playing field level. Now, the specialist journalist tasked with charting the future of our electricity supply is, of course, the wonderful Carol Paton, who's live with us now in our Cape Town studios. Carol, how's it going?
Hi, Graeme. I'm surprised at this choice of topic for your show.
Because beforehand, lead listeners, Carol and I, Carol was debating whether or not we should take this topic given how complex and technical it is. And I said to her that those are my strong suits.
Okay.
But she's already alluded within the questioning that I might be a little bit off, but she's here to school us. Did you know this? Just quickly before we get into the nitty-gritties, we're on day 193 of uninterrupted power supply. Let's clap for Eskom.
Well done, Eskom.
Hey, yes, see, they know how to keep the lights on. Let's hope that becomes the slogan. Okay, Eskom's been unbundling into three entities. We know that opposition parties, some of which didn't like that, they didn't like this move to privatization. One of the unbundling has been the National Transmission Company of South Africa. They essentially get their electricity to the power lines that then connect to our homes. How far along are we with the Eskom unbundling in relation to how IPPs are being brought on board these days, Carol?
Right. So there are three parts to Eskom that are being unbundled. So there's the generation, that's the power stations. They've still got those. Then there is the national grid. So all of those power lines that crisscross the country and all the transmission infrastructure, and et cetera, and the NTSCA, the National Transmission Company of SA, owns the grid. Okay, the state owns the grid. So whenever someone says privatizing the grid, no, wrong. The state owns the grid. And then there's a third part, which is distribution, which is the poles and wires you have in your sort of neighborhood, okay? And Eskom does some neighborhoods, they do the distribution, but in most of us sort of established suburbs, it is your municipality who's doing your distribution. So what they've done is they've divided the business into divisions, and then their first step, they've set up NTCSA as a subsidiary of Eskom, and it owns the grid. And when we get into the discussion, you'll see why it's important that the NTCSA is seen as an honest and independent broker.
Well, let's talk about NERSA in your latest piece, which caught our eye on the front page of News 24 today, is entitled South Africa's Electricity Revolution, How Power Pricing Will Change. And you have this in-depth chat with NERSA Chair Tembani Bukula, and he's got quite a technical background. Take us through his vantage point from the National Energy Regulator, which for the rest of our discussion we'll describe as NERSA. How is it that it is foreseen that they're going to be regulating the price of electricity in future? It's not just a zero-sum game. There's going to be IPPs involved. It's going to get quite ingewikkeld, is it not?
Right. So the thing is that up until now, NERSA's had one role. Well, they've had lots of roles, but one role with regard to the price of electricity, and that is to look at Eskom and to say, okay, this is how much you can charge people. And they do that by saying, like, well, is it fair? Have they been prudent? Have they wasted money, etc., etc.? And that's how they determine the price. In the future, there will be a market, and the market will determine the price. So Eskom and every other independent power producer, or any power producer of any kind, will bid into that market on an intraday and an intraday and a day ahead basis. So they'll say, I've got this many kilowatt hours for this much, and then the market will. And if you can't enter the market that day because you're not competitive, well, then you're not going to sell your electricity that day. So the idea is that it propels competition. So in the future, that's what will happen. But it's quite a complicated matter to develop a market when you've only had one dominant producer, and then you've got a few little players coming in, because who can really compete with Eskom, on their scale? So that is now going to be the role of NERSA, to say, like, how do we level these playing fields? How do we make sure that Eskom doesn't abuse its dominant position, like dominant players generally do?
Right.
So that's going to be their kind of role, and the main thing would be to see that everyone has equal access to the grid. So everybody can fairly bid into the NTCSA with their price, and nobody is discriminated against when it comes to getting access to the grid, either to build your power station or to sell and wheel your power over the grid.
Don't you think it's quite fascinating, just as a quick aside, if we look at history, just how much of a monopoly Eskom's enjoyed for 100 years because of South Africa's always being so, even under the National Party government, trying to be sort of self-sufficient and very state-oriented, right?
Well, I mean, I think that, when Eskom started, that was the way things were in the world. You had a power utility. I mean,
1923.
In a big country like America, you probably had several power utilities, but mainly you had these big state-owned power utilities. And I was just reading a book the other day about Eskom, the founding of Eskom, which was founded by Hendrik van der Bijl back in the 20s. And the whole idea behind Eskom was to sell Eskom at a price, to sell electricity at a price that people can afford. So basically to sell it at cost as a public good. And
wow.
That's why and the world has now changed, because now we're saying, like, well, Eskom needs to make a return, because if Eskom doesn't make a return, who's going to pay for the next generation's power stations? Who's going to pay for the next generation's power lines? So the world's kind of thinking has changed to say, well, these big utilities have to make a return. And then the other big thing that happened, obviously, in this kind of electricity revolution, was the fact that suddenly, due to technology, you could create electricity so much more cheaply from solar and wind.
Right.
And that's the big change that sort of propelled all of these big public utilities into what many people have called the utility death spiral.
Sure. So
you're a dinosaur, and then you become you're suddenly in a competitive market, and it's hard for them to adapt.
So NERSA's of the opinion Eskom's not going anywhere, right? At least for the foreseeable future.
And I think people might not want to hear that because we like to think, okay, great, we're going to have a competitive market. And so you think of, everywhere, all of these different players that would be bidding into the market, and there will be. But at the moment, if you didn't have Eskom bidding into that market, if you didn't have Eskom providing like 80% of the power, or 50, even let's say even 50% of the power, you're not going to have an economy that works. Even a wind farm is not going to, one or two wind farms have got nothing on, one coal powered power station. So Eskom is not going to vanish overnight, and as NERSA says in the story, they think they'll be dominant for the next 10 years, which means their job as NERSA then becomes, well, how do we make sure that they don't abuse that dominance?
Here's our second applause for Eskom, because they're making a profit now. What do you think of that? Because I think it's around the region of 16 billion that they're reporting by the end of this current financial year after tax profit in the green. Yay!
Sort of yay, because Eskom has still got a ton of debt. They owe money. They owe a lot of money to the market. So it's a nominal profit. It's a profit assuming they don't have to pay their debts, okay? And we know that for what government has done is that government has taken over a large chunk of that debt, like about 250 billion rands worth of that debt, and the Treasury is taking that over slowly and relieving Eskom of it so that it can try and become a viable company. So yes, it made a 16 billion rand profit, and people also don't like it because they think, well, why are you making a profit? Electricity is so damn expensive. You shouldn't be making a profit out of it. And so the truth is actually they didn't really make a profit because they're not paying their debt. They're lucky got someone else to do that. It wouldn't be all like that. They'll be great. And the other thing is they got some sort of windfall from a fuel rebate that they got back from SARS, which also kind of boosted the numbers. But that said, much better run company, much healthier, much better morale, very good CEO, very good head of generation. So all good from that point of view.
I've got a friend, he lives off the grid. He's got solar. He's not, Eskom doesn't know about them.
Okay, that's good.
They're not paying anything, that extra fee to have Eskom as a potential backup when the clouds are out and the sun is not shining as brightly within the South African summer.
Yeah.
Take us through how we're moving towards this level of the playing field that NERSA wants to sort of achieve, because it is quite complicated. How are they going to try and set that apart?
From the old days until now, really, you paid for how much electricity you use. So if you used 50 kilowatt hours, then you paid for 50 kilowatt hours. And the price of providing that electricity, like the burning of the coal plus the transmission wires plus the distribution wires, etc., was all rolled into one thing. And now because Eskom is unbundling and we're saying we want each business to compete, that price has to be disaggregated. Now, when we had load shedding, a lot of people went out and they got panels, and they were very pleased. But you also know that when you go and pay your electricity bill, or when you buy on a prepaid meter, you get this service charge, and it's quite a lot. Okay. And, one of our journalists was saying to me, she bought 120 rand of electricity and 80 of it was the service charge.
Sure.
So, so that is the reality. You're going to be paying for the service charge, which is the cost of having the electricity there when you need it. If you're like your friend and you're never going to need it, and on the days when there's no electricity, you're just going to say...
They have a generator. Worry. I checked. They have a generator.
Okay, they have a generator. You're going to run your generator, which is expensive, diesel, etc., etc. It's horrible. It's noisy. It's polluting. But you're going to do that. Or otherwise, you're just going to say, well, we're not going to watch Netflix tonight. We're just going to, you know.
Keep the aircon on. Because they live in a very hot area, so...
So you can do that if you don't have that grid connection. But if you've got panels and you want to, on the day that you're going to either need a lot of electricity or it's very hot or it's very cold and you're going to want to use from the grid, then unfortunately you're going to have to pay that service charge. And one of the things that Tembani Bakula was saying was that in terms of the overall cost, so they split the cost of generating electricity into your kind of fixed cost and your variable cost. Your variable cost is sort of the marginal cost and what it would cost per kilowatt hour once you've paid for all of that stuff, the power station, the wires, the transmission infrastructure, etc., and then you start paying for your first kilowatt hour. And that price is 60 to 80% of the overall price. If you're getting your kilowatt hour, is a fixed cost. And they're busy having a debate with Eskom at the moment as to whether it's 60% or whether it's 80%. And that's going to be huge because, if you're paying 80% of your electricity bill, or if you're paying 60% of your electricity bill just on the fixed cost, it's going to make a difference to you. So we need NERSA to make a fair decision, and that's a difficult question.
Especially with, and reading your article and just casting my mind back. So in 2022, I did an exercise for another media house where I went to all the big 8 metros in the country and I asked each of them on the record what they were doing to bring independent power online. So, what those particular metros within their new vested power given to them by the national government, how far along they were in the procurement phase. Most of them were not very far along at all, with the exception, of course, of
Cape Town.
Of course. And Cape Town has such a rich legacy of having backup power systems with the Steenbras hydroelectric plant. I mean, that was built in the 70s.
Right.
They've maintained it. They've looked after it for a really long time. But I feel like the municipalities are the big question mark, the big unregulated space here.
Well, they're not unregulated insofar as their pricing also goes through NERSA, and NERSA also has a kind of, can put a red pen through their pricing. So Tembani Bakula was saying to me, that they get these price submissions from all the municipalities, 177 of them that are distributing electricity, and they all said in the last year, they want to increase the price of electricity by 30%. So you also need NERSA there to take their red pen and sort of cross out all of those extra costs because, that's not going to work for us. So they are regulated. I think the missed opportunity so far, or the real opportunity, lies in supplying the metros, in them buying their own electricity independently. As you've alluded to, because that is where you get the price advantage. So if you live in PE, if you're in PE and the wind blows in PE like nobody's business, you should be able to get the benefit of buying, cheaper electricity from your municipality than you would get from Eskom.
Hallelujah.
And that's where the whole price advantage would come in with something like that. So we really, it is a important thing for metros to do to incentivize these IPPs, and yes, of course, the difficulty is not all the cities have got the capacity. They haven't even got the capacity to flush the toilets. Okay, only the bigger ones are gonna manage to do this.
For example, Mangaung, one of the 3 capitals of South Africa, is still firmly in the red with its finances, has a huge culture of staff basically charging for overtime, so they can't class their way up the red, still rely on Elec, the central electricity distributor theirs. It feels just a little bit too dated, and I don't know how they'll get to an IPP situation down the line. Okay, let's talk about this. I didn't know an awful lot about this 54 billion rand NERSA mistake that it made. Yeah, I missed that headline. What happened here?
It was a great headline. It was a well-read story on News 24. Very, very disappointing.
Sorry, man. I can't see everything, Carol.
All right. So what happened was So as we were talking about right at the beginning about how NERSA looks at the electricity pricing application of Eskom and decides, okay, yeah, this you can charge for, that no you can't, etc., etc. And they do this calculation, which I don't think is complicated, but it's more complicated perhaps than it looks. So they did this calculation and they made a mistake in the calculation. They basically, so the formula is really, okay, Eskom can charge a return on their assets. So your assets are worth 100 billion and you can get like a 5% return on your assets or whatever. So that's part of the price you can charge. They made a mistake in calculating the return on assets, and they missed it by something like 54. Well, actually, they missed it by about more than 100 billion. But in the end, Eskom said, okay, we'll just take 50 of that. So the impact of that is that we were going to have, this year we had a 12 point something 6% increase in electricity tariffs from Eskom. And then in the next 2 years, we were going to have pretty low increases, like around 5%, like just a little bit over inflation. And that is now going to change because the 54 billion, which they're allowed to recover, hasn't been factored into the next 2 years. It was only factored into the first year. So we're now looking at prices around 8.8% average over the next 2 years, which is a great, great disappointment.
Which brings us to the final sort of main question mark over all of this. With the idea of prices changing in future, the landscape changing, IPP slowly coming on board, but we stuck with Eskom for a really long time still. Does NERSA have enough capacity to be able to deal with all of these big question marks? Because previously, for the lay news person, we just see them determine a price for Eskom and we move on with our lives. But their basket of tasks is going to get bigger, is it not?
And, it's uncharted territory. So these are not things that people in South Africa have done before. No one has started up a wholesale electricity market. So it's complicated. And since the 54 billion rand, so prior to the 54 billion rand mistake, NERSA was taken to court twice by Eskom and lost because they had made the wrong price determination and the court just said, no ways, you've got it wrong here. And so they had to retract. So there were lots of questions like, has NERSA got the capacity? And I think that they really still probably need to boost their capacity. Tembani Bakula, the chairman, is like, well, no one is ready for the market. We're kind of like having to do this as we go along. But I do think they could do with a bit more expertise. But I think one of the things we just need to tell the listeners is that their view, Tembani Bakula's view now of Eskom going forward over this dominant period, he reckons that electricity prices are going to basically stick to inflation. After these next 2 years where we have this 8.8, in the third year from now, electricity prices should start to hug inflation. And I know you've heard it before, and I've also heard it before, but I think the kind of the factors are aligning better so that we can have an inflation-linked electricity price, and that will make a huge difference, not just to households, but to industry, to the economy, and that would be a great thing. So hopefully NERSA and Eskom together can achieve that.
Right. I think that is exactly the answer all of us as lead listeners were looking forward to, which is preempted my final question, which is we're not going to expect cheaper electricity than what we have right now anytime soon, right?
I thought you were going to say load shedding.
No, we're still applauding.
That fear of load shedding. No, there's not going to be any big bang drop.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this price path mapped out for the next 2 years, and then after that, hopefully it starts to hug inflation. But no, there's not going to be any big bang. And so you often get politicians talking loosely saying, oh, well, we'll liberalize the market and the price will go down. Not really, I don't think. I think more likely the price will rise much more slowly than it has been. But, whoever really sees prices go down, nobody.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for answering all of that. It makes a lot more sense in my mind because I haven't been monitoring the IPP side of things for a really long time. And you do see the big headlines. Oh, another new solar farm here, another new wind farm there. And you go, I wonder when these things are sort of coming online. But as we know, nothing happens overnight in South Africa.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Graeme. That's why I'm here, to help you and your listeners talk about these fascinating questions around electricity.
And remember, folks, Carol, before this discussion, earlier this morning on the 25th, payday, 25th of November 2025, messaged me and said, are you sure you want to have this discussion today?
It's payday. Why aren't we going out for lunch?
Drinks on me. See you there, Carol.
Okay, bye.
At 10x Investments, we don't only help you invest for retirement, we help you craft a legacy. With thoughtful planning and meticulous execution, you can create the retirement future you've always wanted. Invest with us today. 10x your future. 10x is a licensed FSB.
Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic now, and this is very much one in the literal sense, as it's one of our most shared stories this week thus far. But if you love expensive coffees, high-end pastries, and only the most trendiest of crowds, then, like me, you've at least once visited the Oranjezicht city farm market when it wasn't hellaciously busy. Well, given that it's very nearly the holidays, don't get a fright when you arrive at Cape Town's premier outdoor collection of vendors and it's simply not there. The news for all of you Cape Townians, Valis and out-of-towners is that the market is moving to a custom-built timber venue from 6 December. That's going to be based at the corner of Dock Road and Granger Bay Boulevard, which is mere steps away, literally across the road from its old location by the V&A waterfront. Today, Oranjezicht has grown to include more than 100 traders, keeping a roof over 3,500 people's heads every year. At the new posse, you'll be able to spot Robben Island on some clear days, and it remains dog-friendly and now includes extractor fans for food vendors as well. The relocation is so topical, it's already been spotted on one of those clicky Atlantic Seaboard WhatsApp groups, which just means arrive early if you want pasta la nata or face the onslaught of peak tourist season in the mother city. Drop us a voice note 072 562 3179 if you've got anything to add.
And finally,
ending off with On This Day in History, the 25th of November 1981. Today we're taking a look back at one of the most audacious and chaotic coups Africa has ever seen. On this day in 1981, a group of South African mercenaries led by the infamous Colonel Mad Mike Hoare tried to overthrow the government of the Seychelles. Yes, if you've never heard this before, it's quite a crazy story. They arrived in Mahe disguised as a jovial tourist group called the Ancient Order of Froth Blowers, with suitcases packed with guns right under their holiday shirts. The plan was simple on paper: oust President France Albert Rene and reinstall the exiled former President James Manchem. But the mission collapsed almost instantly when a customs officer spotted a hidden rifle. A gunfight ensued at the airport and the mercenaries were forced into a desperate escape. They stormed the control tower, they directed an incoming Air India flight to land, then hijacked that aircraft, forcing the crew to fly them to Durban nogals. The incident sparked international outrage. Many immediately suspected that apartheid Pretoria had backed this coup attempt, given its hostility to Rene's socialist government. South Africa's lenient treatment of the returning mercenaries only fueled that suspicion, and eventually, under global pressure, all 43 surviving mercenaries were charged with hijacking. Mad Mike Hoare himself received a 10-year prison sentence, when years later the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that TRC, confirmed the apartheid government had indeed supported this operation. Well, that's what happened on this day in history, the 25th of November, 1981. Okay, so here at The Lead, we've demonstrated that Tuesdays don't have to be that boring after all. If you've got anything to add, mail us, thelead@24.com. You can also send us your voice notes, 072-562-3179. Hit like, follow, and subscribe. You know all the usuals. That way you'll be notified about when the edition drops next. Look, we're running normally like clockwork, Monday to Thursday, 7 p.m. All your favorite streaming platforms, but expect some changes as we move towards Christmas and the New Year's, of course, downtime. Nonetheless, until then, my name's Graeme, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have The Lead. This episode of The Lead was brought to you by 10x Investments. 10x your future.